I'm Secretary of State Dave Scanlan, and I'm here with my predecessor, Secretary Bill Gardner. And together we would like to address the voters of the town of Windham about an event that will take place at the primary election on September 13th in the Windham polling place. After the 2020 election was over, there was a recount requested for the office of state representative. And after the recount was held, there was a great discrepancy between the election night results for that office and the results of that recount. That discrepancy was unexplained. So the legislature got involved and decided to have an audit conducted of that election for that office. And subsequently, the Attorney General's office conducted an investigation of what actually happened in that election in Windham. The result was that there were a number of significant deficiencies in the operations of the election for the 2020 election. And as a result of that, the Attorney General's office directed that there be a monitor in place for the September primary of this year. And a monitor will be appointed, and that monitor will be observing the procedures of the election officials, making sure that everything is compliant with state statute and best practices regarding elections. Secretary Gardner was the Secretary of State at the time of that election, and he would like to talk in more detail about what actually happened. So, Bill?
Thanks, Dave. The appointment of an election monitor to oversee an election in this state is an extremely rare occurrence. This is the first time Windham has ever had one, so it's important that Windham voters understand how this came to be. Because I was Secretary of State when this order was issued, I would like to tell the voters of Windham why this is necessary. Mistakes made by Windham election officials in the 2020 general election triggered a law mandating the appointment of an election monitor for this next election. There were major failures that triggered the appointment. The first was the use of a folding machine that improperly folded the absentee ballots. Before each election, the Secretary of State's office sends to each city and town absentee ballots that are scored along a line so they can easily be folded for mailing without affecting the ability of the machine to accurately count the vote. The Windham folding machine was not aligned to fold the ballots along the indentations provided by the Secretary of State's office on each absentee ballot. The instructions for the use of Windham's voting counting machines expressly warn against doing this, and it resulted in inaccurate vote counts. Specifically, the fold lines went through ovals that voters were supposed to fill in. Due to light refraction created by the folds, the machines counted them as votes. That's why at the recount, the Democrat who had requested the recount lost a significant number of votes that had been mistakenly given to her because of the improper fold. This improper folding had also caused more than 1,000 Republican votes to be incorrectly voided. When someone votes for more candidates than allowed in a race, all of the votes are voided. So some Republicans who had voted for the maximum number of candidates allowed in the House race, which was 4, had a 5th vote for a Democrat incorrectly recorded, voiding their 4 votes entirely. Once ballot counters at the state recount, and again 6 months later at the forensic audit, saw that they weren't really overvotes. The votes that had been voided were awarded back to the Republicans. Another serious mistake was the machines were not properly tested before being put into use on election day. State law requires that machines be tested before an election. For that purpose, each town receives 50 test ballots. Each city receives 50 for each ward in the city, 4 different orientations. We need to know that no matter how a ballot is fed into a machine, it will be counted. The second is to ensure that the memory cards are properly programmed. Prior to the 2020 general election, Windham election officials tested each of the voting machines and memory cards by feeding only 6 ballots into each machine. Each ballot oriented only one way instead of 4. This accomplished neither testing purpose. There was no way of knowing for certain that the machine would count ballots whatever way they were inserted. And with ballot totals of 6 rather than 200, the chances of uncovering any errors were extremely limited. I should add that Windham voters can nevertheless be confident about the results of the 2020 election because hand counts did actually take place, where each ballot was scrutinized by candidates, their appointed observers, as well as shown on a screen. But I cannot stress strongly enough that you can be equally confident in the function of the machines, if and only if proper testing protocols are followed. In this case, Windham election officials did not. That caused the integrity of the election to be questioned, and it damaged voter confidence. There were other problems. Some ballots were never counted. Ballots and envelopes were improperly preserved. Unauthorized boxes were used and not properly labeled and sealed. State law requires the Secretary of State to report significant deficiencies in the conduct of an election to the Attorney General. That same law requires that if the Attorney General finds that a significant deficiency is due to a lack of training, lack of established procedures, negligence, or misconduct, the Secretary of State, in consultation with the Attorney General, must appoint an election monitor to oversee the next election in that town. There has been no finding or even an allegation that the Windham election officials had any dishonest motives. However, either of these failures reflect a level of negligence sufficient to trigger the statutory duties that I have just referred to. The duties of the monitor are also spelled out specifically in statute. The monitor will ensure that all election laws and procedures are followed.
The process for appointing a monitor is designed to make sure that our elections continue to work properly and fairly, and that will certainly be the case in the instance of Windham. All voters should know that our elections have a long history of being conducted well, and that the results that are reported at the end of the night are accurate and fair, and the voters can trust them.